Welcome back. So I now pronounce you divorced. Today we're super excited to be joined by Shauna Warden. Somebody that I know what some of her services are. I don't know what everything is, but she's a divorce coach, certified co-parenting coach, an author, and a podcast host. So only doing those four things, I'm sure you have plenty of free time. So Shauna, tell us a little bit about what you do, and if there's anything I missed, let us know that as well.
Yeah, I'm master of all trades, or no, jack of all trades, master of none, so to speak. But I like to keep busy, and I feel like every time, you work on one thing, it kind of gives you other ideas for other things. And so I kind of just keep going. But so I'm a divorce and co-parent coach. And so what that means, that's, my main hub of what I do. And so I meet with clients who are starting the divorce process or have already started feeling overwhelmed, and I just help them organize their thoughts, organize their files, and be the person that they can talk to on a one-to-one personal basis to try to get the story out of them, to see what's holding you back, what would you like out of this divorce, and then help them work both logistically through it and emotionally through it.
And when you're talking about divorce coaching, I know that when I talk with our clients, there is some confusion about, what's the difference between divorce coaching and kind of like a therapist or going to mediation?
Yeah, great question. I actually just recorded an episode of my own podcast with a therapist, and that's what we basically talked about the whole time, was like, what is the difference between therapy and divorce coaching? And so I basically just like to sum it up as therapy is healing the past. Attorneys, you guys are doing the legal strategy. Mediation is helping you reach agreements. Coaching is the day-to-day decision support, especially when you can't afford, can't get in touch with your attorney all the time. I mean, you guys know you don't you don't want to be answering the phone all the time for like, oh, this happened or this happened. It's like, that's not the space for it. I feel like we all have our little areas of expertise, and your time is better well spent on the legal strategy, where mine is more of, he's late to pick up, or she didn't send the right socks back, or how do I respond to this message?
Earlier you mentioned that you're involved either in the very beginning or while an action is already pending. Is there a point in the divorce process that you think is most helpful for someone in your position?
Yeah, I always tell people the earlier the better. It's sometimes hard to come in middle of the game and kind of get the lay of the land of what's been going on so far, especially if it's been months or maybe even, a year at that point, and you have to kind of do cleanup damage. So I think the best point of entry is at the beginning, but unfortunately not everyone is familiar with divorce coaching, so I might get referred through their lawyer or through their therapist. And so I think if they are able to come in with a clean slate and kind of not really know how to get started, that is the best time to hire me, because we can just start off with a blank canvas.
One of the things that, as attorneys, we focus on is, I know nobody wins in divorce, but we win, right? As attorneys, like, somebody's going to get primary physical custody. Somebody might get to stay in the house. Somebody's going to get the outcome they wanted versus the outcome somebody else didn't win. So, how does a divorce coach really work with an attorney to improve the outcome or to have a successful outcome?
Yeah, so I think the biggest component of working alongside attorneys is that I can help the client with the emotional aspect of things. I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of clients that come in. They are overwhelmed. They're worrying about the wrong thing. They can't see the big picture. I like to help them get organized so that when they do get to you, their papers aren't all over the place. They're not scattered everywhere, and really just help you protect your time, a client's money, make the best use of that retainer, and help them prevent impulsive legal moves that might have, a detriment to their case in the long run.
I like your comment, get organized. I'm thinking, I remember these times when clients would come in, literally just a box. Here you go. I have no idea what's in here. Help. So it's great that there's someone in your situation that might be able to kind of parse through and either prioritize and kind of help out. Divorce is emotional, and you're spot on. What patterns do you see in once the process has started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we're all pretty familiar with that the roller coaster, right? Like you're angry, you're sad, you're avoiding it, I think it depends first of all if you are the one initiating or wanting the divorce versus someone who's like, I don't even want it. I didn't want this. I don't feel like it's fair to have to go through all of this when I'm not the one who wanted it. And it's like, okay, I understand you don't want this, but this is happening. So, let's try to, acceptance is a big part of it, I think. And so, emotional patterns, can look like shock and grief, being really hyper focused on fairness. And like you said, Charles, nobody really wins. I always tell my clients if both of you walk away a little pissed off, then it's probably a good settlement, right? And then another thing that I see a lot is just fear driven urgency, right? You get those frantic emails or those frantic phone calls about a situation that's happening right now. Well, if you're in court, it's like I can't attend to everything that's happening. And if it might be an emergency to the client, it doesn't mean it's an emergency to the case, but they don't always understand the difference, right? And so I like to come in. I'm a little bit more accessible than you guys, which is a good thing. It saves you a little bit. But, I'm the person that they can turn to when they're in that spiral, and I'm talking them off the ledge and saying, okay, big picture, is this going to make or break your case? Let's talk. And a lot of times they just need to be validated and heard. But you go through those patterns a lot, and you talk them off the ledge one day, and then the next week, they might be on the phone again, being like, oh my God, it's happening again.
Yeah, kind of talking about Kibler-Ross model of the 5 stages of acceptance of grief or whatever, I always tell my clients, I'm like, look at that. I'm not going to talk to you about it, but maybe look at it because you're probably going to follow the same strategy. And that really goes to trying to get them ready. So how do you work with your clients to get them ready for the emotional part, and then like all the decisions they have to make, right? Not only do they have to make decisions about where their kids are going to go to school, maybe who's going to have primary physical custody of the kids, but how finances are going to be split up. And I know that in my practice, one of the easiest things to do was take the parent who wanted the kids the most, and then they would probably accept the least amount of money because you could balance the two off of each other. So how do you prepare people for those type of decisions that are going to have to be made?
Yeah, I think you landed on a really big key word, which is balance, right? Like you don't want to give up all of your custody. You don't want to give up all of your money, the house, everything. But what are your values? And so, one exercise I do with them is writing down their values. Like, what do you care about the most, right? Usually it's the kids or staying in the same school district. And that way it's like an order of priority so that when we are going through settlements, it's like, okay, this is the hill you said you wanted to die on. And this is the thing that you said, you don't really care about. So let's use those as our negotiation points. And then in terms of getting them ready, I think a big piece of what I do, obviously depending on how the divorce is proceeding, but if they have to go to court, people get freaked out by court because they don't want to experience it. They don't know about it. There's like a certain, dance that you have to do in there, and language, and, stand up, sit down, like all of these things, and how you approach the judge. So anyway, just kind of like getting their expectations in their head wrapped around what's going to happen in court, how to present themselves. So yeah, I think just helping them get ready and setting some expectations for them is very helpful.
And that goes to the mindset of making sure that you are balanced and not always just reacting to something, whether it's big, middle, or small, right? Just the emotions run high. What are some of the mind shifts that you work with your clients that allow them to feel a little bit more grounded so they're not as so reactive to things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, we hear about it all the time now, this regulation, staying regulated, especially if there's kids involved. And so, you can't really help your kids if you're dysregulated all the time. You can't go into mediation or into, a settlement talk when you're all stressed out and everything's going to get a reaction. So, part of our work before getting into those rooms is, these are some realistic expectations that might happen in these rooms, and having those really tough conversations, especially like with moms, stereotypically moms want full custody. They gave birth. Chances are they made all the appointments. They're doing all the school things. And now all of a sudden, some of that's going to have to be shared with somebody else. And so, but some of them are just like hell bent on I'm getting full custody, right? And it's like, okay, you can ask for that. That's great. I love that for you. But the reality is, especially state dependent. I just want you to have in your head that that might not happen. And as I'm sure you guys know, those are not always great, fuzzy, warmy conversations that people want to hear, right? But they're necessary. So having like some of the tough conversations outside of the courtroom before they have to be in front of all of these people to get those emotions out, I think is very helpful.
Yeah, that you talked about the emotions. I had a mediation that lasted, I think, for 18 hours.
Oh
And
my
we
God.
were well into the morning, only to get to the very end to find out the wife had purposely pawned my client's dead mother's jewelry for $10 just to hurt him.
Mm.
And the judge got up and walked out. The judge said, nope, take this to court. And he told her, he said, ma'am, you deserve what's going to happen to you. And you talk about, the parenting, right? I don't think a lot of people realize how much under the microscope they're going to be put. And I'm glad you talk about the expectation, because a lot of people try to say that expectation doesn't exist about primary physical parenting. So, how do you talk to people about, you're going to be put under a microscope. So if in a normal relationship, if you were late to school once a quarter, nobody would care. But now if you're late to school once a quarter, you're going to have a judge sit there and say, look, I was never late to school. My kids have never been late to school. And you're going to have the attorney sitting there shrugging their shoulders being like, my kids have never been late to school either. How do you talk to people about how normal idiosyncrasies are now just going to be pounded on?
Yeah, that's a big learning curve because, like you said, everything you do is under a microscope, especially if you're in these like high conflict cases, right? Where it's like, gotcha. Every week, it's like he has a bruise on his shoulder. It must be from mom's house. What's mom doing? So just letting them know that you're human, reminding them that they are human and nobody expects you to be perfect. And I'm a really big believer in the documentation system. I'd rather have too much documentation and not need it than have nothing and show up to court with no history of anything. And so, talking to them about one-off situations aren't really going to impact anything unless it's like obviously horrendous situation. To your point, attendance, right? Like if mom is getting them to school on time 5 out of 5 days, but dad's weeks were going 0 out of 5 days, and it's like 3 months. That's a pattern, right? And so like those are the things that are going to matter and going to show up. My clients get so sick of me because I'm like, did you document it? Did you document? What did the documentation say? So I think that's a big thing, a big hurdle for them to have to get over, because documentation can be its own full-time job. I'm sure you guys see that all the time.
It can be. And, documenting is definitely good, right? As lawyers and litigators, all right, I hear you, but tell me what you have to kind of back that up to substantiate this. How do you balance that documentation? I think is so critical with healthy co-parenting, and what does that really look like?
Yeah, I think it honestly depends on what is your co-parenting relationship looking like. And I'm sure we've all seen it all sorts of different ways, right? Like you start off amicable and everything's great and this is so easy until somebody gets a new partner or somebody disagrees with the other co-parent, and then it's like, okay, all the gloves are off, right? And so I think that healthy co-parenting looks like being predictable, being boring, being businesslike. I always tell my clients, like, write this email as if it's being read in front of the judge and jury, or, write it like you're writing it to a coworker. You're not gonna, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna go off on your coworker. You're gonna use the Biff method, or, we go through all the strategies. And as cliche and overused as it is, I mean, really try to be child centered, because even when a lot of them say they are and think they are, if you listen to their stories and how they're showing up and reacting, it's like, no, you're making this about you and not about the kid.
When we talk about kids, I think that's generally one of the areas of most emotional issues that people have. So how do you work with your clients to make sure they're emotionally prepared for mediation and court, and especially the outcomes, right? I've watched a judge announce a decision and watched a parent start flipping out and screaming and had the judge go, nope, never mind. I'm going to reopen this right now.
Oh my gosh. Right. Exactly. Well, that's a big part of it, right? And I have been on the receiving end in my own experience going through the divorce and co-parenting and court system. It's a very nerve-wracking, high stakes game. And I feel like if you don't have the right team working with you, my lawyer at the time did not prepare me for like, hey, here are some possible outcomes, right? I felt like if I just would have known what mindset or what expectations could potentially happen, I wouldn't have been so emotionally reactive, especially when it comes to your kids. And so I do think helping clients prepare by setting realistic expectations, having those tough conversations with them outside of the courtroom, and multiple times, right? Sometimes you have to have these conversations, especially custody conversations, many times for them to feel confident enough to walk in there and just be like, okay, this isn't what I imagined. Like, what's best case scenario? What's worst case scenario? Hopefully we land somewhere on the better end than the worst end, but let's walk through all of the different scenarios so that we can wrap our mind around if that actually happens.
When you're talking about documenting and having these conversations and feeling confident and comfortable, what types of communications tend to escalate conflict the fastest? Because again, going back to the very beginning, it's all balancing. And that's where I feel your role is so critical. For those who are listening and tuning in, what are those communications that maybe they should avoid that tends to really kind of escalate?
Yeah, good question. And I hate to be a broken record, but of course, it depends on your co-parenting relationship, right? Anytime somebody tells me that they have a verbal conversation, my like chest tightens. Because I'm like, well, did you follow that up with like a written synopsis that you both agree on? I'm like, if you're going to have a verbal conversation, I understand sometimes you're in the doctor's office, you have to make like quick decisions, you're on the phone. But always follow it up with a written communication, because that way we do have something to back up what we thought was being discussed. Because how many times do you leave a conversation, you think one thing happened, the other person thinks another thing happened, and then you're like, no, that's not at all what I agreed to. So I'm a big believer in, of course, like written communication. I prefer email with they have the co-parenting apps, but a lot of people for some reason are turned off by those things. So if it's not a co-parenting app, I like email. It's time stamped. It's less likely to be manipulated. I feel like text messages, even though it is written, we're so, quick to react. Whereas I feel like emails, we don't have to react as quickly. And of course, when your thumbs are doing all the work, your brain's not even thinking half the time.
That's true. If I don't text anybody, and that's the advice I give everybody that works with us. Like, don't text. Never text a client. If I text, it's like, I'm here, and that's it. I appreciate text messaging for what it is, for evidence in court. That's the best evidence we have. So we talk about keeping people's minds focused on what they're doing, and a lot of what I've seen, especially as the idea of gray divorce, right? People that are getting divorced a little bit older in life, is the financial fear and uncertainty, right? They've set up a life pattern where they were going to be retired, they were going to live off this much money, they were going to buy their social securities, they had these 401ks or IRAs, and now everything changes. How do you deal with the emotions of that? Because usually what I've seen is it's one person feeling like they're going to be destitute and another person feeling like the spouse is stealing money from them.
So I have a lot of feelings about these types of divorces. And I know you specifically said gray divorces, but this also can show up in like stay at home mom situations. That's a huge one. But when you have both people are sacrificing, right? Like if you're a stay at home mom, you're sacrificing your career, your growth, all of those things. You don't really have any financial independence. And then the other person who has been working this whole time is like, well, why should I have to give up half of my 401k to this person who didn't even work? And it's like, well, that's also the agreement that you had when you were married. But yeah, when you get divorced, I think it creates a lot of uncertainty, panic, um, avoidance, especially for the person who doesn't have control of the finances. I think part of that work is, depending on which client you have, whether it's the one who has no income or the other person, it's that mindset of, yeah, you might have to lose a portion of your 401k because that was, it's a business. Marriage is a business. And when we get married and we're in our fairy tale era, we're not really thinking about that. But then when it comes apart, it is treated like a dissolution of a business, right? And so somebody's going to have to give up something along the way. And that doesn't mean it's for forever, right? We have all of these boundaries in place. Maybe we give you a portion of the 401k, or I pay you spousal support for X amount of years, whatever that looks like in that situation. But going back to our previous conversation, what can we negotiate? What can we offset? So hopefully not neither one is walking away destitute. I don't feel like that should ever be the goal.
How do you advise or maybe even allow clients to feel more comfortable and confident making these financial decisions? Because you explain the why, which makes perfect sense, but they're still emotional and they're still not sure. And they're a lot of times really just, quite frankly, just scared. How do you walk them through that so they can feel confident in whatever decision is that they're going to make?
Yeah. And so just like you guys, we all have our area of expertise. I am not a financial analyst, financial advisor, anything of the sort, but I can get the ball rolling with like, let me tell you some of the documents that you might are probably going to need. Sometimes they don't even know what they have, right? Especially if they're the one who hasn't been the income earner. And so my next step is let's reach out to some people who can help you feel better about your situation financially and give that financial advisor or CDFA or whatever all of the paperwork, the numbers, and they can probably make you feel a lot better because I'm sure you guys know this. A lot of us are not financially savvy. We kind of just see like a number and we don't even really know what it means, right? Like how long can I live on this? What does this mean as far as my budget goes? And so having somebody in your corner that does understand numbers and knows all the tips and tricks to help you make it last or reinvest it, I think is worth the investment.
It probably is. You talk about, I mean, a lot of people look at that and they say, oh, well, I used to warn people. I said, you're going to go from, most of our divorces, I think most anybody's divorces, they're being honest, are $1 million transactions now. With the division of house, spouse support, child support, division of retirement accounts, you're probably talking about $1 million. And people don't have any concept of what it is to transfer that amount of money to where it needs to go and how it needs to be reclassified for tax purposes and all the fun things you get to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're going through divorce, I remember one of the questions, it wasn't infrequent that I would get. We would get done with the divorce trial, walk out in the hall, just kind of talking with the client about, what just happened. And they would say, now what? And I'd be like, I don't know, man, go to a singles bar. You're divorced, have fun. I don't know. Like you're asking a divorce attorney what I'm supposed to do after the divorce. You should have asked me during the divorce. But
Right.
how do you help people find their identity when it's all said and done, paper signed, and they go home and sit down and it's over?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think that is not something people prepare for. I mean, obviously, people don't really prepare for divorce either, but you're so locked in on, 1, 2, 3 years of trying to get through this. And it's like, when's my next court date? When's my next, summary due or whatever? So then when everything's all signed and done, especially if you're co parenting, I get scared to tell them, but again, it's like those honest conversations where it's like, this isn't even the hard part. The hard part is what comes next, right? Which is like, okay, what is this second part of my life going to look like? Or what is co-parenting going to look like? And so in our sessions, we certainly talk about all of those emotions that came up during the divorce, questioning your self-worth, loss of certainty, loss of a role. A lot of people put a lot of stake into their role as husband or wife, and now that's gone. And especially if you've been married since you were young, it's like, I don't even know what I'm into. I don't know what I like. And so my biggest suggestions is just like, go try stuff, because how are you going to figure it out just sitting at home doing nothing? And so if it's something that you were interested in before that you haven't had time to do, and like you don't have the kids 3 nights a week, go to the gym, go to the book club, go pick up a hobby, or reconnect with your friends that you haven't been able to really spend time with. And so it is a really weird transition period, but it is a good time to really figure out your likes, your dislikes, and try new things and meet new people.
Yeah, going through the process, you're always like in survival mode. And then once the dust settles, it's like, okay, well, what's next? And so it sounds like you work with clients post divorce, which I think is great. How do you get them to focus on that long-term growth mindset? Because, for X amount of time, which could be years, it's always like, I'm on the defense, I'm in survival mode. Now it's like, okay, how do I kind of think about the future? How do you work with the clients in those situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so sometimes you do have to slow them down, get them to pause. They're either thinking too nearsighted or too farsighted, right? It's like, okay, what are the things that are happening right now that we need to take care of? So let's focus on that. But then how are the things that we are focusing on right now going to affect us long term? And so, like, perfect example, right, is co-parenting. And so it's like, you're making these day-to-day decisions, and yes, you're still figuring it out and learning your new role, but how is that going to impact your child long term? How is that going to impact your co-parenting long term? Like, you don't want to say no to everything, burn every bridge you have, and then need this person one day, and like now you can't pick up the phone because you've been kind of a jerk to them for the past, however long. So in I'm like, co-parenting is forever. Even when your kids are grown and old, it lessens, but that's forever. But in terms of, outside of co-parenting, I do think it's hard for people to imagine a future because it's not looking like what they had planned, right? And so some of my clients will be like, you look so, healthy and happy. And like, I can't imagine that one day I'll ever be there. And I'm like, okay, this is 10 years post what you're going through right now. And like, the only thing that you can do is day by day, one step at a time, put one foot in front of the other, and just, keep going. I think a big part of it is also not getting stuck in that victim mentality, right? Of like, woe is me, this happened to me, nobody's ever going to want me again, or like, I've got that scarlet letter on my chest walking around town. And so I think you've got to just keep going.
And I think that's great advice, right? A lot of people like to sit back and lick their wounds and just take another step. It's okay. No,
Yeah.
not that many people are going to sit there and wallow with you in your sorrow for too long. So,
Right.
from your perspective, if you could tell people like one last thing, right? Like, what do you see that really sets apart those people that are going to be successful through the divorce or after the divorce, and those people that are going to kind of never get over it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the people who reclaim their agency during some of this, because again, especially if it's high conflict or if it gets kind of combative, depending on the dynamic, right? It's very easy for one person to railroad another person and the other person to kind of be like, okay, whatever, like, I'll just sign the paperwork for you to leave me alone. Guess what? They're never leaving you alone, right? And so I think when I see clients starting to assert themselves a little bit more, reclaiming some of their stakes in the game, I think that's really helpful. And they become a player in this whole situation that they're not letting it happen to them. They're speaking up, they're advocating for themselves, for their kids, which isn't always easy to do.
Well, Shauna, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I know a lot of the people that I've talked to could really use your services, but what is the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can just email me. It's my name, shaunawarden@gmail.com, or they can just visit the website at shaunawardencoaching.com.
Well, thank you very much. And for our listeners, hit like or subscribe. We look forward to talking to you all next time.